Hey everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel. This is day one of the Summer Paintings project. And this week the theme is going to be iPhone photos of my two girls. I have a 3-year-old named Agnes and I have an 8-month-old named Cecily. So I'm going to be just looking through my phone at old photos of them and try to find interesting photos that I might have taken of them and use those as the content for the paintings this week. If you want to support this project, you can find a link in the description to my website where the painting that we're about to make will be for sale. So let's get to it. Let's paint. Okay, so this first painting of this whole project is a painting sourced from an iPhone photo of my daughter Agnes after she had fallen asleep. Her hands were sitting on her bed in this really interesting pose that I just took a photo of. I never really planned to make a painting of it, but as I was thinking about things that I wanted to paint with this project, one of the first things I thought of is I want to get back into painting the figure. I want to get back into painting things that kind of relate to what I painted when I was younger, when I first started painting back in like undergrad, and I was attracted to certain types of content. The first types of paintings that I was really interested in making were usually of the figure, and they were usually something that expressed some kind of internal state of the figure. So for me, if I'm not painting the face, another part on the body that became a real big theme for me was the hands, painting the hands, because they tell a story about the person and they express something about that person, maybe how they're feeling or what they're doing. And I just love that gesture. And I think that also probably is why I'm really attracted to a lot of Southern European painting, especially a lot of Spanish painting, painters like, El Greco, Velázquez, these kinds of paintings where you have hands that are really expressive and a lot of times even exaggerated. And so that's what this is, Agnes. It was actually only a few nights before our second daughter was born, Cecily. I snapped this photo. It might have been only a week before Cecily was born. So right now in the painting process, you can see I'm just using a flat brush, just a pretty stiff flat brush, a synthetic brush to mostly just draw with. And at this part of the painting process, I'm measuring quite a lot. I printed out the photo and I'm doing a sort of sight-size painting process where I'm painting at the same scale as the photo, just to speed things up with the drawing. I can flick my eyes back and forth just to verify the accuracy of the drawing and speed that whole beginning process up of the painting. The color that I'm doing this whole underpainting in, or this whole underdrawing, whatever you want to call it, underpainting, underdrawing, for me, it feels about the same. The color I'm using is transparent oxide red, I believe. I don't even know if was I using a certain company. I have a few different tubes of this paint kicking around. And for this purpose, it doesn't really matter because it's mostly going to get covered up with the top layer of paint. But you can guys see I'm just going around and blocking out the composition, making all the things placed where I want them to be placed. And I'm doing a lot of basic drawing things at this point in the beginning of the painting. So really, this is me kind of just going back to painting one, drawing one, where you're doing a lot of measuring. You are trying to forget what you're looking at and just really focusing on these sort of shapes that are in front of you. So that's what the beginning of this process is for me, going back and forth, flicking my eyes, occasionally using, either the back of my brush to make measurements, or I'm using a compass to make measurements. I started doing that, I would say maybe 6 years ago, using a compass. And it's something that I don't use fluidly all the time, but I end up using a compass more for when I'm needing to make really accurate measurements, something to where the back of the brush can only sort of get you there. So You can see I actually just readjusted some measurements there. I had the fingers just a tad bit too long. I increased the length of the palm, pulled the fingers down a little bit, pulled where the fingers meet the palm down a little bit as well. Starting to get into some more confident drawing at this stage of the painting. So another thing about this particular painting that I was really attracted to, or at the onset of it, that I was like, I want to get into this photo and work from this photo to make a painting, was because of the color space. And what I mean by that is that you can't see it at this point yet in the painting, but the light in my daughter's room totally comes from these really warm Edison bulbs, those sort of bulbs where you can see the filament and they glow like the same color temperature as candlelight. So those are the bulbs that are illuminating her room. It's her night light, the lights that will leave on for, an hour or two as she's falling asleep. And then before we pack up and go to bed, we'll hop in there and turn the lights off after she's safely asleep. I love actually how messed up the photos become on an iPhone. When you take a photo in that light context, the iPhone, to compensate for the low light, does something with either the ISO or something with the internal settings that it creates this really rich orange cast to the photo that only happens when you're taking the photo. It doesn't really happen when you have a video going on an iPhone, at least not on the iPhone that I have, which is a few years old. The orange cast just creates this amazing rich glow. I suppose if I were to set up in this room in that warm light and try to paint under the same warm light as I'm looking, it would almost be impossible to capture the color accurately and to translate any of that experience in painting straight up from life. The only way I'd really be able to do that is if I used a different color light temperature just on my painting surface. So this is like one of the instances where I think painting from a photograph is really advantageous for the color palette of the painting, because otherwise you'd have to have this kind of ridiculous setup in a room like that to accomplish it. Though I've done that before, but I think for these quick paintings, just working from a photo and getting the color going from there is going to do the same thing in a really fast way for me. So actually, this sort of weird color space was something that I became really interested in a few years back. I must have been in grad school at the time, and I just would randomly, as most painters do, you're watching a film or something and you pause it and then come back into the room, and then you realize like the color in a film is just so extreme. Like the color space, it might have this really strong blue cast to the color space, or some kind of rich, really warm color to the film. And it's something that I would be like, man, I want that to be able to happen in a painting. And how can I do that if I'm painting from life all the time? And so when I was in grad school, the way I accomplished this was creating these sort of like color zones. So I would have one zone of light on the setup, what I was looking at, and then I would have another controlled light on my painting. And I would separate those spaces out with using some kind of like a divider, like a really heavy black fabric divider that didn't allow any light bleed from one space to the other. And so then I would have a really cold temperature light on my painting and then a really warm temperature light on the setup. And then I would match the colors still like I normally would. And through that color matching, I had to compensate for the cool light that was on my painting. So I end up mixing those colors all really warmly. And so then when I pull that painting out of the cold light, I get this painting that has this amazing warm glow to it. So that was one way that I was accomplishing these sorts of paintings, doing them from life in the past. And I'm still really fascinated with that as a process, as trying to recreate a situation that happens with cameras and white balance and a sort of isolated color context in one space, say in the digital image, and then another isolated color space outside in reality. I love that. I love playing around with these different ideas of context and how context shapes our perception. And for me, I mean, that kind of goes back to a lot of Albert's color study things and color theory. You know, if you're inside of a room with warm incandescent light, your mind gets used to it. It sort of auto white balances to it, and the warm incandescent light feels like white light to you, and it feels natural and normal. But then if you're outside at night and you're walking by and it's like twilight and the sky is like this rich, deep, dark blue, and you look up at that same room with the incandescent light and you see the window looks orange because you're outside in a different context. As a painter, that's something I've always been really fascinated with, is this sort of subjectivity of context and how you perceive things based on the context from which you came, or how your mind sort of acclimates to an environment. And then you could be in a really strange space and it feels normal. I remember once hearing about this color experiment that I don't know if it was a grad school program, one of them that, I don't know if it's at MIT. Don't quote me on where I have this source from, but there was this color experiment that was done where they created a color deprivation room sort of thing where you could go inside of this enclosed room and there would be these walls all surrounding you that were all able to be illuminated with a certain color light. You could almost think of them as like an RGB light or something. So they could make this room completely like bright green. And so the idea of the experiment was that you would go into this room and they would make the light some kind of bold color, like a bright green or like a magenta. And you would stay in this room until the light looked normal to your eyes, until you kind of acclimated to it and your mind white balanced to that new color space. And then you would leave that room. And then all of a sudden it looked like there was this crazy filter over your entire experience of the world. And I guess this happens in a small way, like too, when you wear sunglasses and you're outside on a bright sunny day. And if you're wearing sunglasses that have a certain color cast to them, maybe it's like a blue cast or some other color. When you take those off, everything has this kind of reverse, almost complementary exaggeration to it from the context from which you came. And this idea of exaggerating those differences, I think that's just a fascinating concept for me. I love it. To me, it relates to so many experiences that we have in life, where we grew up, colors the way that we perceive the world and how we understand culture and how we understand different people. And the more experiences you gather in, the more you're able to empathize or at least sympathize with other people who are different than you, and grow through all these rich experiences of different cultures and different people. So, let's just talk about these hands a little bit more. For me, I think when I was first starting out and painting, I was really attracted to a few painters. One of them was John Singer Sargent, and it was mostly for the reason that a lot of people fall in love with John Singer Sargent is how loose his paintings look, but how tight and refined they appear at the same time. They feel like they're so loose but so tight. It's this kind of contradictory reality. It just shouldn't make sense. It shouldn't feel so resolved yet have such loose brushwork. And that's something I think that I was fascinated with and I was in love with so much as a young painter, and even still to this day. If I'm at a museum and they have some John Singer Sargent paintings, if I'm in Chicago and I'm at the Art Institute, I'm definitely going to stop by the Sargents that I know they have in their collection. And, maybe the content isn't that fascinating. They're paintings of just rich people who commissioned him to do portraits. But when you just look at how he's solving the problem of turning form and creating light and using materials in this extremely clever way, this way that just is so creative and it feels intuitive, but you know, so much time went into learning how to paint in that way and how to simplify or even clarify form in this amazing, rich, sped up way. It's something that I always go back to as a painter, and I kind of just can't get over it. I love it. I love how Sargent was able to simplify things with paint. So for me, there's moments in these hands that I'm definitely thinking about Sargent, especially in that hand on the left side. Some of those little notes where there's just a swash of paint on, say, the ring finger on the right hand, the hand that's left in the painting, but it's actually the right hand. These little highlights and the way that the form is turned through different gradient steps and wet paint blended into wet paint. That's something that I'm really attracted to. You'll notice in my process, I kind of build form out through gradient steps and then blend these steps together and try to work wet into wet as much as possible when I'm achieving those things. Another thing I think I was attracted to in this painting was the weirdness of the positions of the hands. It was kind of a confusing thing when I walked into my daughter's room after, I think it was she fell asleep. I came back into the room to turn the lights off. And then I noticed that her hands were in this really strange position, overlapping in a way that it was a little confusing. Like how are these hands connected to the body? One of those moments. It's like, which hand is which? Is that the right hand or the left hand? Why is it bent like that? And that sort of response that I had when I walked into the room. And then I just intuitively was like, I need to take a photo of this. Later on, I'm thinking, some good paintings. And that was one of the first painting ideas I thought of when I'm thinking, I'm going to work from iPhone photos for this week. I also liked in the painting the kind of narrative that you get with the fabric and the pattern in the fabric. And it's something that feels handmade, something that feels like it's for a young person, a child, maybe a toddler, or even a baby. So the blanket that her hands are resting on is a blanket that was made for her by, I believe, a great aunt. It would be her great aunt. Yeah. And it's a quilt, this beautiful quilt that has all these different patterns that all come together and kind of interlock into this whole. And that's something I love just even about quilting in general, how you can get all these different patterns that don't seem like they should go together. But when they're all locked together in this one surface, in this one object, they work somehow. All the patterns sort of neutralize one another, and you get this nice holistic design. Something that I just really love about quilting. So yeah, this was painting number 1. Tomorrow we'll do another painting from an iPhone photo. So stick around. And if you are interested in this painting, it's going to be available on the website. So click the link over to my website and I'll have this painting available for purchase. All this work is going to be available for purchase, and that's going to be the only way that this channel is supported, just through selling art. I don't want to monetize it through advertisements or, making you watch annoying marketing to be able to watch these videos. So that's it. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Bye.